wasn't a good weekend for Irish rugby, with both Leinster and Munster seeing their seasons end at the URC semi-final stage. And on tonight's episode of the Left Wing podcast, we will be picking through not only those two games, but also discussing Andy Farrell's squad announcement as Ireland prepare to head off to South Africa in a couple of weeks' time. Will Slattery here with you, delighted to be joined by Cian, Tracey and Rory O'Connor in studio, and by Luke Fitzgerald on the line. And we'll go to that squad announcement first. Obviously, a lot of interest around who Andy Farrell's going to be bringing to South Africa. Some notable omissions, though. I know Cian had the story last night that Jack Conan won't be travelling. His partner is expecting the birth of their first child soon. But Jamison Gibson-Park ruled out through injury as well. A tough series. Obviously, they're going to Loftus Versfeld, where Leinster just got a fairly comprehensive defeat. Now, the same players with a couple of additions are going, minus, as I said, some of those star players. How are you feeling about things that they're seeing in that squad?
Well, yeah, I mean, Gibson Park maybe the tipping point of kind of feeling good about it, tour, a kind of a combination of the way the season has ended for the provinces, and then seeing, going without Keenan is such a big loss already, and then to compound that with kind of the star of Leinster's season. I know he hasn't probably been as influential since the semi-final against Northampton, but he gives the team, both teams he plays in, such a spark, Gibson Park, and Ireland have become very dependent on him, I think, over the last while. Leinster even more so. So for him to pick up a hamstring injury over Loftus and be ruled out is a real hammer blow to their chances of going over there. And suddenly you start thinking about how this tour, South Africans have been promising to unleash hell in the next couple of weeks. If it doesn't go well, if it is a tour too far, a la the 2012 trip to New Zealand, then you got a really hard November. Then Andy Farrell's gone for 6 to 8 months, which I know you have been a fan of, Will, but I'm starting to see the danger signs of how the entire project starts unravelling, and maybe that's just the nature of losing, the two teams losing at the weekend and a bit of doom and gloom. But this looks like a very tired bunch of Irish players that are going, and there hasn't been enough renewal. There's not enough. I think the players that have been brought in that haven't been capped before, they're really going for the experience. I don't see them, unless Farrell has a master plan, I don't see them having a huge influence on the pitch. I'm excited that Sam Prendergast is going. I'm glad Izuchukwu's going. But really, the 23, you could almost start predicting it now, and it's going to be pretty familiar. So it's, from Andy Farrell's point of view, it's probably no harm. He's getting an extra couple of days to work with them, maybe a game less in the legs, a chance to refresh and renew. But it looks like a serious ask from here.
Yeah, as Rud said, Sam Prendergast, Izuchukwu and Jamie Osborne are the three uncapped players. Anything else jumping out to you, or what do you think of the announcement, Cian?
Well, yeah, I know we're going to obviously get into and talk about the games at the weekend, but the manner in which the Leinster scrum was dismantled by a Bulls side who aren't exactly full of Springbok stars has to be absolutely alarming from an Irish perspective, when you think that Leinster pack that started could easily be an Irish pack. Maybe you throw Peter O'Mahony, you do, because he's obviously retained the captaincy, Tadhg Byrne. But look, Andrew Porter has been one of the most important players, I think, along with Gibson Park for the last while. I think he's become even more important now. I think Jeremy Loughman is unlucky, I have to admit, to miss out. I thought he played well at the weekend. The Munster scrum was actually decent against Glasgow, but you have Cian Healy backing him up, who isn't getting any younger, and it looks like Tom O'Toole will probably be covering Loosehead as well. So if anything was to happen to Andrew Porter, and knowing how good the box scrum is, Ireland could be even in more trouble. So that's certainly something that jumps out to me. I think there's a lack of depth at lock as well. I think you'll have Izuchukwu and Ryan Baird will be covering there, but I think they're both far more effective in the back row. So a few holes. Rudd has obviously touched on a few different things there. Full back, scrum half. I think Craig Casey picked a bad time to have a poor game, I think, last weekend. I think it opens the door again for Conor Murray probably to start that first test. We all know how good he is in terms of around the fringes defensively, and I wouldn't be surprised if Andy Farrell goes back to that. But that changes the complexion of Ireland's attack, I think, when you don't have the speed that Gibson Park or maybe Casey brings. Now, maybe he will bring Craig Casey, but Caelan Blade obviously comes in from the cold as well. Hasn't been his best season either. So I think when you look through it, the depth chart of Irish rugby isn't as strong as maybe we would have liked to think over the last couple of years. So I think an already tough test has been made even tougher, especially in light of the weekend's results.
Yeah, with some of the players missing, it kind of does remind me of when they went in 2016 and Johnny Sexton was rolled out and a whole host of senior players. Now, the difference then with South Africa, we're at their lowest ebb they'd probably ever been at, rather than now they're world champions, twice over, and have won a Lions Test series as well. So it promises to be a great series. Luke, what's your perspective? Anything you want to add to what the lads have said, or anything that's jumping out to you?
Not particularly. I suppose the most pleasing one for me is to see Izuchuku in. I think he was so good against Leinster. I thought he was kind of, when he went off the pitch, it looked like that was Ulster's last chance, if you like. You know what I mean? It looked like the wind went out of their sails. He was so important to them. So really looking forward to seeing if he kicks on. He's an exciting prospect up there. And it's kind of been a while since they've kind of produced someone locally, I think, who's so dynamic, I think. So really excited to see if he gets an opportunity. I mean, I think on the basis of his last couple of games, I think he'd probably have a good case. Like, I didn't think Baird played well at the end of the season. So that's one I'm watching closely. I think Farrell has been great at kind of reinvigorating things after, kind of prolonged parts of seasons and disappointments within the provinces. You think of Leinster over the last couple of years. He's done a good job of turning things around, but this looks like a big challenge. I would agree, but I think there's probably more to be positive about. Really, the only other area that probably will concern me is fullback. Really, I think letting Keenan go, I think that really cost Leinster on the weekend, which we'll get into further. But I think it'll cost Ireland as well. I mean, there's no real obvious 15 there. I mean, Jimmy O'Brien, I think did a decent job, but I think he needs more time. I think before we can really, trust it. I suppose have the same expectations in terms of performance as we would have of Hugo Keenan. So I know I'm only picking out two areas, but they're the ones that kind of were glaring to me when I looked at it. And I do genuinely think with the way Baird finished the season, I think Izuchuku has a good chance of making it into the squad. So it's a tough ask. I mean, I think we saw from the Leinster performance just how tough it is to go to South Africa. And I think this Irish team will have their work cut out. But, there are some positives there. Ringrose back in, I think, is nice. I'm pleased to see him there. I think he gives the team better balance. Bundy Aki doesn't play for any of the provinces we've been watching, like last weekend. And, he was so big. He was such a big player for Ireland in the World Cup. And this kind of terrain down there, hard ground, really physical opposition, that really suits him. So, and sorry, by the way, I do think, Crowley hasn't been unbelievable around him, but I think he's turned into a really solid player. I think he's international class. He looks like he's, I think he's looked like he's growing as a player, and I think he'll do a really good job down there. And he's very physical. I think he does well in those games too. He's a good tackler. So it's not all doom and gloom, I think there's probably I think it's probably a good thing that Gibson Park isn't there. I think, I probably would like to see Casey or Blade have a go. I think there's an opportunity to blood someone in a very difficult environment. I think Rhodes is right to point out the concentration risk there for the team and how much revolves around Gibson Park. I think they need to find a way of, someone else. You don't have to be the exact same, but you've got to try and be close enough to him, because this team has to play quick to beat South Africa, I think, and to beat any team, and I think, the scrum half being kind of nippy and getting the ball out quickly is an important part of that. And look, Murray is a great player, gives you something very different, and that's, I think, a lovely tool to have in the box, to be able to change up a game, to slow it down, if you're under pressure or whatever. But yeah, there's look, I picked through a good bit there, Will. I'm still excited about this. I'm not as worried as the guys. I think there's still enough in the tank to have, 2 games isn't a massive. If it was 3 games, I'd be thinking, whoa, that's a big ask. But I think they can do 2. There's enough quality in there, particularly amongst the pack, and that's obviously going to be the key area against this South African pack. There's enough quality in there, I think, to give a good account of themselves.
Yeah, we'll be looking ahead to that series in more depth over the coming weeks. Rod, obviously you're going down to South Africa, so we'll be looking forward to checking in with you. We might move to the weekend then. Bulls 25, Leinster 20, Munster 10, Glasgow 17. There's something about whenever we have Leinster and Munster in opposing semi-finals, and we're all looking towards that final. 5 times in the European Cup, they've been in opposite semi-finals, they've lost all 5. 2017 and this year, it looked like they were destined to meet in the URC final, lost both semi-finals. They did play once during COVID, but no fans there in the final. It didn't really feel like a major occasion, so we've been robbed of them in a real kind of occasion like that. And I think after the weekend, I don't think anyone could have any complaints about those 2 results. Like, who's feeling worse about their life, Leinster or Munster, as we sit here today, do you think?
Oh, it's an interesting question. I think Leinster are feeling worse about their season, and Munster are probably feeling worse about Saturday, because I think Leinster's defeat on Saturday is more explainable. I mean, Leinster shouldn't have ever been in Pretoria last weekend. They should have beaten Ulster at least once of those 2 games. They should have picked up enough points along the way to have a home run at least until the final. And that when they look back on this campaign, they won't really, I think, hone in on a tired-looking performance at altitude against a Bulls team that were amped up to the max and delivered. I say a number of those Bulls players delivered career best performances. In particular, Cameron Haneke, who was utterly exceptional at number 8. Munster were so far off where they needed to be on Saturday against a team that, like Glasgow sometimes beat them, and it's a good rivalry. But at home to Glasgow in a semi-final, that performance just was nowhere near what they needed to deliver, and the opportunity was so great for them. But the way they topped the table, across the season, they've done a lot of the things they would have liked to have done. So it's disappointing for both of them. But I think if you're looking at just purely Saturday, I think Munster was the more disappointing of the two. Even if Leinster would expect, budgets, all that sort of stuff, Leinster should be beating the Bulls.
You'd wonder if, knowing that Leinster had been knocked out before they kicked off against Glasgow, if that maybe fed into any kind of the
fed into how you put up the sign.
I was just going to say it certainly fed into someone behind the scenes who thought I suppose they had to get the graphics ready, but whoever pressed send to put up on the big screen was not a good idea. Look, it's a massive missed opportunity for Munster. And I thought Munster and Leinster both similar, and I think you're right, Will. I mean, to give the due credit to the Bulls in Glasgow, they were fully deserving of their wins. But it was kind of, to me, reminiscent of like the World Cup quarter final, the Champions Cup final, when Irish teams just aren't bringing their best when it comes to the crunch. And I think that is one of the most disappointing aspects. Rud's touched on, the travel and the altitude, and I actually thought the altitude was a massive factor. Luke spoke really well about, the difficulties it had on last week's pod, and I'd asked Leo Cullen on Friday. Now, it's obviously his want to downplay it, but I thought that the players looked so leggy. Now, whether that's at the end of the season, whether it was altitude, I thought they got the game plan wrong in terms of keeping the ball on the pitch. I thought they should have been trying to find touch more often with their kicking game. And then from Munster's point of view, to not, like Rudd said, they were so far below where they needed to be. And same at Leinster, whether it was a mental thing or what, I'm not sure. But the amount of errors from both sides and compounding them, and that's been a bit of a theme, unfortunately, over the last few weeks. And when you look at it from a Munster perspective, when we were chatting, Rudd, on last week's pod, I was kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt in terms of the Ospreys' performance. I was thinking, maybe they were trying to conserve energy for what, they pretty much knew was going to be a semi-final because they were that much better than the Ospreys. But in hindsight, when you look back in it, the warning signs had been there back as far as the Edinburgh game, the Ulster game and the Ospreys game. So since the Connacht game really was the last really good performance that Munster have had. So while they came into the game on the back of 10 wins, which was like obviously seriously impressive with lots of momentum, I think, the cracks were starting to appear, and it all just came to a head on Saturday. I was down there at the weekend, and it was just so, like, the final whistle went and it was just so flat. I think everyone who had turned up realised what was at stake and what they missed out on. The fact that lots of Munster fans but most Munster fans weren't able to go to the final last year, so they didn't get the chance to see their team win, like end their long wait for the trophy. And I think that's what it was being billed as this weekend, if things had went well, to get the chance to defend their title, whether it was against the Bulls or Leinster, and to have missed that opportunity. And with the players that they're losing, I think that they'll live to regret this for a long, long time, actually, because it was such a golden opportunity and they'd worked so hard to win that home advantage.
Yeah, I think Rudd put it actually very well when you said that. I think Leinster will reflect over the course of the campaign and be very frustrated with how they managed certain elements of it, whereas Munster, as you said, with Leinster being knocked out with the home game against the Bulls, who would have been travelling back from Pretoria, which would have been a long flight and a abrupt preparation, that was a massive opportunity. Luke, I might go to you on the Leinster game first, though. What was your perspective on what went wrong for Leinster? I know it was only 25-20 in the end, but I think a lot of people have the sense that they were pretty well beaten, and although they did have a chance of winning the game or snatching at that, they were second best in most areas.
Yeah, that was my sense of it. Sorry, I would have loved to have had an answer or have a go at that last question, to be honest with you.
Go for it first. You can answer whatever you want.
Yeah, well, I just think Leinster. I think Leinster, really. I know that was a tough ask, but like that end of the season, like some of the selections, I'm very concerned about what's going on there at the end of the season. I really am. I really think, like Glasgow coming over to Thomond is still like, that is a tough game. Like if you think I think people are really underrating how good that Glasgow team is. I think they're really tough, and they're a nice attacking outfit as well. And definitely, obviously the first try, you're kicking yourself. Like that was such a bad mistake, and that really I thought that kind of turned the game. I thought Munster hadn't got over the line or anything like that, but had looked pretty dangerous, had a lot of, momentum, and looked like they were kind of in the ascendancy. But that, to my mind, wasn't as bad a loss. Like Glasgow come over there a lot. They'll be used to it. It is a semi-final. So I would think that, to be honest with you, I think Leinster should be way more disappointed with if you think about all the internationals they had on the pitch down there. I know it's a tough ask going to Loftus, but I just thought they never looked in the game. Like Munster at least looked in the game for that. Like I couldn't believe how close that was. For in Leinster Bulls, I thought the referee actually kept Leinster in that game massively. Now he did miss a few big things, and I do think the point about Irish teams in the big games, I have to say, so much of it comes down to the ruck for me. I just think they're getting completely cleaned out in that area, and they're just not committing enough numbers in there and respecting it enough. And I think they're trying to play at too quick a pace for too long in the game. They're just always trying to play at pace. I think they can't change that. You've heard me say that a few times, Will. I just think, Leinster, I suffer with it a lot too, but I do think that Ireland can suffer with it at times as well in some of the big games. Not being able to play the game at a slow pace and kind of dictate things and just hang on to the ball and play smart sometimes. They just have to always trying to break the opposition down. Now, just play to our strengths and all that kind of stuff, but you've got to be able to play slow sometimes too, and respect having the ball and the ruck. I just think the one thing that's really struck me at all the finals with Leinster and the big games that are on where they haven't performed is the amount of complaining going on to the referee and not actually sorting out the problem themselves. Like, you have to realise the referees are under pressure here. They're not going to help you out in the big games. And I think for Irish rugby as a whole, that's something that they really need to get their head around. I thought Joe Schmidt was really, really good at that, calling it the lifeblood of the game. I think that's been the key to why we haven't really seen a great Irish performance in lots of the big games that they've played, even the ones they've won for Grand Slams and things like that, just not playing to their potential. So yeah, to that point, I thought Leinster got completely cleaned out. Physically, I thought they looked like they were overpowered clearly at scrum time, which was a bit surprising. I thought they'd done well in the last couple of weeks. I thought they might get some kind of parity there, but they were overpowered there. And I have to say, even at line-out time, I don't know about you guys, they look so conservative at line-out, very similar to Ireland, very nervy, everything to two, everything kind of short and line-outs. Like, I don't know. I just the line out to me seems to have been completely abandoned as an attacking tool. It seems to be just let's try and get the ball back and get possession. Like, they can't seem to tie in enough forwards and be confident enough to throw the ball to the middle or the back of the line out and get the ball back. And then just kind of big errors and big moments. Like to get to like the positioning of everyone for the Peterson try, which is I'm going to go on. It's obviously my moment, but of the week. But the positioning, like the people chasing back, no blockers in the way, letting him have a clean jump. I think it was at Jimmy O'Brien. I just thought there was so many mistakes and kind of really big moments. And I just have to say, I was so disappointed with Leinster, and I'm worried that they're not taking it seriously enough. That was my sense from Leo Cullen after the match. He was kind of saying, have to give the Bulls credit, and it's a tough place to go. All true, but I don't know. I would have been devastated if I was him to have lost that game. I think they're a way better team than the Bulls, and regardless of all the challenges that go with winning down there, I just didn't think it was good enough, guys. And I think even the fact, like even allow, like say Hugo Keenan not being there in the weekend, like how have they allowed that to happen? How like he is such an important player. I just think they just don't seem to value the league at all. And I nearly think they deserve to have gone out in the semi-final with the way they treated the last 5 or 6 games in the league. So part of me didn't feel too sorry for them, if I'm being honest. And I thought they were very well beaten. And that's very, very worrying, I think. The only thing is, looking into next season, they obviously have they've got a new, like Blayandale coming in, apparently it's excellent. And they do need something with their attack because that's completely fallen off. But obviously Snyman coming in with Barrett, I mean, it looks like they need some kind of spark. They need something because they can't get the job done in the big games. I'm very worried about them.
A lot to get your teeth into there. Like, anything you want to pick up on, Ruth?
Yeah, like there's loads. I think the big thing for me is the Stuart Lancaster's been as big a loss as anyone to Irish rugby, not just the Leinster setup, but to the Irish setup as well, because Lancaster wasn't shy about coming forward, about talking about how what he built Andy Farrell would then layer onto with the Ireland team, and I thought the Ireland team looked like it was running on fumes a little bit in attack without Johnny Sexton as well during the Six Nations, and the Leinster attack has gone unbelievably backwards since he's been there. Since he's departed, and I wonder whether with Racing not going particularly well for Stuart Lancaster, and I don't know how long Leo's going to stick around. If the team keep losing, I don't know whether, I don't think he'll ever be pushed, but I wonder will he ever walk, or will they find a different position for him? But could they almost be a match made in heaven in terms of a Lancaster return at some stage? Because I think the attacking detail has massively fallen down in standards. Like the passing was so poor at the weekend, the handling, the attention to detail, knowing your roles. It's not Leinster-like, and I think Leinster have made an identity sea change, and they look like they're only halfway along with it this year. They're moving towards they've gone away from this, the Joe Schmidt. Joe Schmidt built it probably, or certainly built on what was there, but Joe Schmidt turned them into what they were, and then Lancaster made it something slightly different, but it was still the same kind of set of values, and they brought in that Nienaber. And if you think about what got them into the position to win the Champions Cup final, it was their kick chase, which obviously was Joe Schmidt's strength, but it was a very South African thing. It was their scrum, and then it was the missed drop goal at the end. Like their attack let them down in that Champions Cup final. And I think next year, if they bring in a Rabbit Slimani, they get a long range goal kicker like Geordie Barrett, and they have Snyman in their pack. I think they're going to move more towards a forward orientated Springbok style game. And I don't know if it suits the players that are there. They want to play. I think.
Can I ask you a quick one? Do you think the defence? I think the defence got completely picked apart on the weekend.
The defence wasn't,
and I don't think that's been good enough either. Like that's no, I don't hear anyone saying that. Like that's one thing that is a bit concerning to me as well. Like you think about the errors that were made, like for the Toulouse tries, like awful. But some of the ones on the weekend as well. Like, and I thought Willie Leroux looked like the best player on the pitch. He completely picked the Leinster defence apart. And nothing's been said about it. I don't know how good that defence is.
I think they've I think they've sacrificed an awful lot to go for that defence. And I know, Cian, you made this point last week as well. But I don't know if the players that they have, like when Nienaber was putting in this defence and was going full on rush, he had Cheslin Colby on one wing, he had Curtly Arenza on the other, and he either had Valemsa or he had Willie Leroux sweeping in behind. James Lowe doesn't turn as quickly as either of those players. James Lowe is an incredible rugby player, but he is not fitted or suited to that defence, in my opinion. Jordan Larmour probably fits the bill a bit more, but he's not got the top end speed, and we saw the mistake that he made on the right edge for the try that time. And then in behind, I think Keenan would probably fit any defence, and he's so good. But when he's not there, Frawley gets cleaned out for the pivotal try the other day. O'Brien's been cleaned out in the air a couple of times. He was found wanting, I think, after Bear gets done and they get the room down on the edge for the first try, wasn't it? Jimmy O'Brien's in the wrong position, coming across. So whether the safeguards are not built in because he hasn't had enough time with these players who he started building the programme, then they disappeared to Six Nations camp, goes back doing the Andy Farrell / Simon Easterby defence, and then they has to come back and run them again in this defence, or whether there's just players don't suit the system. We know from what Bernard Jackman has told us that like Dylan Lades had a conversation with Bernard Jackman, which Bernard Jackman subsequently told the world that Lades was in the Springbok squad when Nienaber took over. Nienaber brought him aside one day and said, look, you're a great player, but you don't fit my system. You go off to France and earn a living. You're not going to play for the Springboks anymore. Like, there's players in the Leinster team that don't fit the system, but I don't think he's got the options to say to them, good night and good luck. I think he's having to tailor.
Do you think on Nienaber then? Because I totally agree with you, and I think it's something about the Springboks that doesn't get spoken about it enough. It's like that they're this big, powerful side, which absolutely they are, but they've got two of the smallest players on the wing. But it's because their speed allows them to, number one, get off the line, and number two, when they do get in behind, they have the pace to make up for it. So I wonder, and I agree with you. I just don't think the Leinster have enough pace to, and it's been proven to be true because they've been cut open, and the job that the Bulls did between Goosen and Willie Leroux was outstanding, and that's where Leinster have been vulnerable throughout the season, has been out wide. So I wonder if perhaps there's more of an onus on Nienaber to slightly tweak the system, because you can't just like cut and paste everything and expect it to be the exact same. And it's clear that the players are struggling, I would say, in it. They still look a bit hesitant to me at times when they're looking to get off the line. And this isn't just something that happened at the weekend. We saw it in the Toulouse game as well. He said it would take, 14 weeks to rewire their players' brains. Maybe he made 14 months. The fact that he didn't have a pre-season there, I think, is really important. And I've made this point on the pod before, which I don't think got discussed enough at the time, that Andrew Goodman also missed pre-season, which meant that his first time taking over from Stuart Lancaster, he wasn't there to implement the game plan that he wanted to put in place either. Now, I asked Andrew Goodman about the criticism of the attack a couple of weeks ago. It was after the Champions Cup final, and he was quite defensive about it. Like he actually thought it had been overplayed, but I don't think the payoff for the direction that Leinster have gone and the onus that they've put on the defence has been worth it in terms of their attack, because it has stagnated. Now, again, I think we should talk about the out half picture as well, because this is something we didn't discuss, and we should have, in terms of the Irish picture. The fact that Andy Farrell has picked Cian Frawley and Sam Prendergast in the Ireland squad ahead of the first choice Leinster out half
and second
and the second choice,
is jarring to me. It reminds me of when Jamieson Gibson Park, when he spotted his potential before anyone else did. And look, I don't think that Ross Byrne is the only problem in this team, but when the attack isn't flowing, and Luke is right, there's problems with the breakdown and the speed of ball and all that. But the reality is, and it's an uncomfortable truth, that Ross Byrne hasn't been able to get the job done for Leinster over the last while in the big games when he's been playing 10. And the fact that Andy Farrell has now picked, like I said, Cian Frawley and Sam Prendergast ahead of him, to me, this could be a sea change, I think, for Leinster going forward. It will depend, obviously, if they get game time in South Africa, but if the Ireland head coach is picking two players ahead of him, then I think something has to change in Leinster. But whether it will or not, I don't know. But I think that's part of the problem as well.
Yeah, it's funny because I have three things written on my sheet for why I think Leinster ended up trophyless this season. You guys have all touched on different elements of it, like the out half selection, which we've talked about ad nauseum on the show. From the get-go this season has been botched and chopping and changing. The management of the squad, as Luke touched on, they binned those two games in South Africa. They kind of binned that Ulster game as well. If they picked up even an extra losing bonus point in one of those games. And then, the last one was the attack as well, which I know of the defence I didn't actually have on my list as high as.
I wouldn't say they didn't bin those Ulster games necessarily, but the B team was nowhere near as good this year as it has been in other years. Players who, have been in Ireland squads were picked in those games and didn't perform. They mismanaged the end. The team that played up in Ravenhill was in a position to win that game. James Ryan was the captain, and they botched the end game. Back in New Year's Day, the team that they sent out was the first time Caelan Doris has captained Leinster. It was a strong team. It wasn't first choice.
About the one recently,
the games that they've lost, they were games that Leinster. I know the URC is better now, but they were, with South African games aside, they were games that Leinster would traditionally have won. But the calibre of the players in the second string is nowhere near as strong as it was when Jimmy O'Brien, Hugo Keenan and these guys were coming through. And they're not winning games that they used to win. Now, as I say, the standard of the competition has risen. But there's Leinster's academy's got unbelievable reps for good reason over the last couple of years. But I'm concerned that who's the player? I know Joe McCarthy's come into the Ireland squad, but he was at the World Cup. There's no one who missed the World Cup pre-season in Leinster who's completely burst into the team and made a difference.
Maybe.
But he was at the World Cup pre-season. He was flagged before. You're right. But at the same time, once Ringrose came back, he was dropped for the final. I know he came on in the second half. Where's James Culhan? Where's Max Deegan? Max Deegan's a big cheerleader on the sideline. Where's Scott Penny? These players who've been pushing and pushing, we should be pushing and pushing and pushing. They're nowhere near on the biggest days. So the strength of the squad is nowhere near as good as it was. So I think that's the fourth element. I mean, the elements you flagged are very much relevant, but when you're talking about a URC campaign, not just Saturday, it's not. They're not the force that they once were across the season.
And I think Luke's point as well is ultimately they don't care about the league in a huge way. Andrew Porter's comment last year was so telling when he said they don't count the number of URC stars in the jersey. Everything Leinster do in terms of their selection, the elements I touched on, is geared towards Europe. As in all the games I mentioned there came before European knockout games. They're basically saying like, and I can kind of understand it to a degree. They want to win Europe, and they have such a strong squad that they probably think by default we can almost get to.
I think that attitude stinks. I have to say. I think the URC.
Look, that's me projecting.
No, I know, yeah.
But that's what it seems like.
The URC has far more credit in the bank nowadays than it did back before. Leinster have still not won the URC since the big South African teams have come. Like, you had a scenario there at the weekend where several of the Leinster players had never played in South Africa, never been to South Africa, had never played at altitude, whereas they had the chance over the last couple of years and they opted not to bring them. And Luke touched on that about it came back to bite them. So they're going to have to reassess their approach over the summer, I think, about going forward, because I don't think Leinster are in a position to be turning their nose up at possibly winning the URC.
But like, Luke, correct me if I'm wrong, that was never the case when Michael Cheika or Joe Schmidt were in charge. I mean, I remember Owen Redden. We used to all write off the Rabo or whatever it was back then. And Owen Redden used to come in like once a year and read us the riot act for the fact that we weren't treating this competition seriously. Like, I know Heineken Cup was always the number one, but I always got the sense from Leinster that the league was, maybe not in parallel, but it was an important competition that you wanted to win.
I honestly have never played a game. I never played a game and not like unbelievably like dying. Like I never felt the team wasn't dying to win. I promise. Like we had off days, but I never heard any of that chat. I never heard and I think they were probably a bit smarter about how they made changes. Joe Schmidt particularly was really good at that. I thought he was really good at kind of introducing 2 or 3 guys in a game. So he kind of, like, whatever way he planned it, I thought he planned it really, really well. And it meant that it also meant that guys were coming into a team with more established players playing alongside them. So that made that easier for them to kind of integrate and to play well, rather than coming in when it's kind of 12 or 13 guys and properly wholesale changes. I thought they did that really well. And it meant, you did rest guys for some of the cup games. The cup games are bigger. It was a bigger competition. You definitely, probably, you look back in your career, like it's not like when people ask me, if you were successful in your career, I don't say how many leagues I won. I do say how many cups I won. But at the same time, we definitely placed massive importance on it. And I don't think we treated it with the disrespect that I think Leinster have treated it with the last couple of years. And I promise you, I don't say that lightly. Like, I know if I see Leo, he'll clip the head off me, but I do feel like they've made some big mistakes around selections with it, and they haven't used the league to their benefit either. Like, I said this a couple of weeks ago. I was like, the benefit that you get from playing teams that are, it could be their last game of the season. They're trying to, they're fighting for their lives, either to get into even a 7th or 8th position to get into the, into the quarterfinals, things like that, guys. Those teams it's unbelievably valuable to play against them. Like, they're really, really tough games. They get your fitness levels up for the semi-finals, the finals against the big teams, and I just think they've missed opportunities to play their best players in those games. And I think they're kind of wrapping people in cotton wool. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And they really need to start winning some of these. I think I agree. Cian's point about this competition being really difficult to win now, I think, is really on point. And I think it'd be really valuable for these guys to go ahead and win one of them. I really do. And I think they should be able to do that. They've got all the quality within the squad. They've got a great bench, whoever they select there. They can't be worried. I think they're overly worried about getting guys injured in kind of big games and protecting them for them. They have good substitutes in there, and you never also, by the way, develop anything behind you if you never play your big, if some of your big players never get injured. So it's like a double-edged sword on that one. I just think they need to cop on, and they need to start picking the right teams at that time, and just don't train the guys during the week. That's what we did. We did barely any training in the big games, at the end of the season. You just did loads and loads of video work, walkthroughs, organization, and then you did some kind of short and sharp sessions. I feel like whatever way they're working it, they're just not, it's not happening for them, and they're not getting the balance right, and they're not getting the guys in a position to play cup rugby, knockout rugby at the end of the year. They look leggy. Like, they were so lucky to get away with the Northampton one. I called that one out a couple of weeks before that. I just thought it was a big mistake not playing the guys for that long before. They called it out themselves. But even afterwards, I thought Ulster was a good opportunity to even bring up 14 or 15 of your frontliners, and take, a portion of them off if they look tired. Still should have won the game. I get the point, Rhodes, but I just felt like they looked like a team that weren't battle hardened at the end of the season. And and then looked subsequently kind of leggy whenever there was any long phase of play or any really physical portions for long periods in the game at altitude. And the point about them never having played at altitude is very poignant as well, I think. So loads to pick through for them. I think they might have to do a proper rethink. I think it's good that at least they'll have a proper preseason and a proper run in this season. I think that'll be important for them, and some new thinking as well into the setup about the attack, I think will be important. So expecting the new blood and the time to make a big difference to Leinster this season. And hopefully, I mentioned the interview with Leo because I hope they are picking through this thing with a fine tooth and comb and really looking at themselves, not just the squad, looking at the coaching staff and what some of their decisions and how they impacted, another trophyless season for Leinster.
Yeah, since the South African teams entered the URC, Leinster have 23 points more than anyone else, and they've won 6 more games than anyone else, and they've no trophies to show for it. So they've been by far and away the most consistent team in the last 3 years, have won more matches, scored more tries, scored more points, every single metric except the only one that matters, which is raising a trophy at the end of the season. And I think they're still managing the squad, to both of your points, like it's the Rabo Pro 12, and that's the competition they're facing week in, week out, and they haven't adjusted their thinking to the new competition and the new quality that's come into it over the last number of years.
We should mention that they are hamstrung by the fact that the RFU stipulate they have to rest players at certain times. They are bulk contributors to an Irish team that put an awful lot into a World Cup that ended in crushing disappointment. Then also were bulk contributors to a Six Nations campaign that looked like it took an awful lot out of the players by the end of it, and like those factors, which Leo I'm sure would point to, are can't be discounted. Like, they are part of it, but they should be used to dealing with those factors as well. Like that there are more complexities to being the Leinster coach. I think getting rid of Leo and replacing him with someone some people are calling for will be a mistake, because I think actually managing Leinster is quite a tricky, complex thing to do. But there are decisions within that he could have made that I think could have, the out half thing has just baffled me also. Yeah,
10. The 10 situation has got to be resolved.
They're not their strategy confuses me. Even replacing Stuart Lancaster with Jacques Nienaber, who I find interesting and admire and think is obviously clearly an excellent coach, but he's so different. They're signing 2 players next year, box office players. I don't understand where they fit into the team. Maybe they go onto the bench, but you're signing one of the best centres in the world in an area that you have, Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose.
Osborne now.
Osborne as well. The second, Snyman comes into a squad where you already have Joe McCarthy and James Ryan. The strategy behind that I don't quite understand. I would have put nearly all your resources into a tight head to back up a Tyke Furlong, and maybe even a loose head to back up Andrew Porter, who I'm increasingly concerned about going 78 minutes at altitude again. They've
got young props though who they need to start pushing on through, like the likes of Thomas Clarkson, Michael Milne. It's time now that they started stepping up, because even in the Irish context, the idea, and Cian Healy, fair play to him that he's still going, but that's pretty damning that Ireland and Leinster are still so reliant on a guy who's at the tail end of his career. And again, similarly enough, you're looking at moving a tight head potentially on this tour to cover loose head. So you'd like to see more of those guys start pushing on through. Now, I know props tend to take a little bit longer to mature and develop, but these guys aren't fresh out of the academy any longer. They've actually been around the setup for a while now. So I think it's a big season next year in terms of pushing them as well.
Yeah, so many interesting talking points. We could really go on for the whole show on just Leinster, but I want to talk a bit more about Munster, Cian, and I want to ask you might be able to shed some light on this. I hope
I can now after this.
Yeah, I know, I put a lot of pressure on it. But as I was in Portugal last week, sunning myself, recuperating for my wedding and checking in occasionally with what you guys were talking about in the left wing and your articles. Alan Quinlan's comments on off the ball interested me, and he was kind of pointing to this kind of potential behind the scenes friction between Graham Rowntree and Peter O'Mahony, or Graham Rowntree and senior players. And I was just wondering, is there stuff going on behind the scenes? Because it has been a strange season with, the contract stuff being drawn out and various elements like that. Is something going on behind the scenes with discontent or a clash of personalities?
I think people have heard the rumours. I've certainly heard the same rumours that Alan Quinlan was talking about, but I can't stand them up as being true. Peter O'Mahony was up doing media last week, and he said that the contract process had been messy. Obviously, he didn't go into specifics about it. I think if there had been something serious, it possibly would come out even more. Look, I think people are going to players and coaches potentially disagree all the time. They just don't come to light. Peter O'Mahony found himself, I suppose, in the unusual scenario where he was coming off a contract. He was still the Irish captain. I'm sure he felt he was worth X and Y. Maybe Munster then, having to absorb his salary, felt it was worth slightly differently. So it was messy enough, as he says, but I certainly haven't heard that there's been a major bust up behind the scenes or anything like that.
He resigned the captaincy.
He didn't resign his captaincy yet, but he gave his reasons for that. Like, look, this is something that maybe we won't get the full truth until...
In the book.
Yeah, it'll be in the book. Are you writing it?
No, I don't think I'll be first choice, to be honest.
But maybe it is one of those things. But look, I don't... Like, the Munster doing as well as they did, apart from crashing out last weekend, if there had been massive friction and disharmony in the camp, I don't think they would have put the season together that they did, particularly in light of all the injuries that they had, you know. So I think from everything I hear that the players really like the new coaching staff and that, and I think if they felt like their captain and spiritual leader, Peter O'Mahony, still massively obviously respected in the dressing room, if they felt like there'd been a major falling out with the head coach and captain, I think that probably would have come to light as well. So heard the rumours, Will, but I haven't heard anything that I can actually stand up as being true. So yeah, an interesting one, but I suppose you can't really say too much without knowing, can you?
Yeah, and like, how do you reflect on where Munster go from here going into next season? Because obviously, like, RG Snyman's going up the road to Leinster, Frisch is leaving, going to Toulon. Is there two huge losses? Joey Carberry, who's not as big a loss, but it would have been a key backup. Obviously, he's being replaced by Billy Burns. Like, their squad on paper won't be as good as, you know, next season. So you're hoping that maybe the game plan that is still only, you know, after 2 seasons gets honed further, and if their injury luck holds up, they obviously won't be missing as many key players earlier in the season as they were this year, but on paper they'll have a weaker squad that they're going.
That's the key, because they don't have the depth of squad that other teams, Leinster in particular, do, and they've had a really horrific season with injuries, and I think that's, if I was explaining the European kind of what went wrong for them there, that's what I would pinpoint. But I think their URC campaign was, I mean, I think injury didn't help. Like, losing Thomas Ahern and Joey Carberry after the win over Ulster was really disappointing, because I thought Carberry actually in that game, he came on early, he played a 10 alongside Crowley, and their attack looked really, really good. And on Saturday, they really could have done with him coming in with a bit of a calming influence, because Crowley, I think, his form has dipped, I think, towards the end of the season. Again, played an awful lot of rugby and has had to do, you know, I remember talking to, was it Stander or something, one of the players after their first Six Nations. I think playing your first Six Nations as a starter for Ireland can really drain you. And he's trying to do it for his province over and over again. I think Carberry would have been really important. Where do they stand? I mean, I think it's a huge lost opportunity, as I said before, because of exactly what you're talking about. But they go to the start line next year, and they're missing their superstar lock, who they didn't always have, but when he was there, he was generally very, very good and very effective and broke games up for them. Zebo has been their best attacking creative force all season. Frisch, I think it's only since we've realised he's gone that I've probably appreciated how good he's been. I think his partnership with Nankerville, although not particularly high functioning at the weekend, has been really good all year, and I think he's the lost Irish rugby Frisch. The more I look at it, the more I think, I know they're taking 5 centres to South Africa, but I think he could have had a role to play for Ireland, and certainly for Munster he was such an important player. So yes, Brian Gleeson will be better next year. Edmund Dogbo will be back. Jean Klein hopefully will be back. Ollie Yeager will get a pre-season under his belt. He'll have a summer tour to South Africa. He could be a great addition to what they have in that tight five. Crowley coming in. A few new players. Attacker Abrahams will add a bit of X factor to their backfield. Like, they'll still be competitive, but there's no guarantee that you get back to this point, and there's definitely no guarantee that you're going to top the table and have a home run at it. And you might go a bit further in Europe, and then suddenly you're trying to fight in 2 fronts, which Leinster have found very, very difficult. So it's opportunity lost. Yes, Munster will always be thereabouts in the URC particularly, but this was such a golden opportunity, I think. And, you know, and having started so well and looked like they were way on top of Glasgow, and then thrown in a mistake that opens the door for Glasgow, and then having to chase your tail for the rest of it with the opportunity that they had, I think that they'll have so many regrets about last Saturday, because they never really got what they got within an arse's roar of it, really. Like, well,
it's funny, like, even at 17-10, like, they were knocking on the door for that equalising try, and then I just don't think you want your season coming down to Snyman going out the side door to John Ryan. That's just definitely like one offload too many, even though a guy who's usually very good at them. I just thought that was just one extra one.
They just on Snyman, and this isn't Captain Hindsight either, because I did refer to this in my preview. I thought it was a very strange selection, I have to say, putting Snyman on the bench. Now, ironically, I know he didn't have his best game when he came off the bench, but you started a guy, Finian Wycherley, who's only started 5 before last weekend, had only started 5 games. He'd only started 1 game in 2024. Now, obviously, he'd been injured. Now, I think if that's a Jean Klein or an international standard lock, I think it's more understandable because you're bringing on Snyman off the bench. But I thought Munster overthought that, I have to admit. I think Snyman has been so good for Munster in this 10-game run, like Rudd has touched on. For me, I think he should have started the game, and I thought that was an error. I didn't think Finian Wycherley had a good game, if I'm being honest. I think he gave away 3, if not 4 penalties, and it was no surprise that Munster went to the bench as early as they did. So while the bench has been a massive weapon for them, I think they overthought that one.
I agree. Like, for me, it's not a bomb squad if you're like picking a significantly weaker starting team to facilitate this kind of avalanche off the bench. Like, you look at the Ulster game, because I remember reading your report and you were like, you just mentioned like the minute where they all came on and the game turned. But why were they 10 points down to Ulster in the first place? Why are they double digits down to Glasgow in the first place?
I think Snyman was really important.
So I just think Leinster made the same mistake against Toulouse. I said that before. I didn't think having Will Connors in the starting team and keeping Ryan in reserve on Van der Fleer was the right call.
Conan's been
Jack Conan, who's been kept on the bench all season for that reason. I think it's not a bomb squad if you're just going with a weaker starting team and keeping your better players in reserve. It's a bomb squad if you have a strong starting team and kind of equally strong guys, or it's a 50-50 call. When there's a fairly decent disparity between your starters and the guys you're keeping in reserve, I just don't understand why you're only having them for 30 minutes when you could have them for 50. I understand, obviously.
Hallelujah, Will. Like, honestly, it's the garbage that was going on with South Africa in the World Cup, where they nearly cost the best team in the competition the cup. Like, madness. Like, you play why would you put a ceiling on the amount of time you can play one of your best players? Like, I don't get it. It's absolute madness. It's like you're sacrificing the start of the game for the end. It's bizarre. I understand why, it's obviously the end of the game decides. The start of the game has a pretty big important part to play in how the game turns out as well. I just find it absolutely bizarre how you do that, unless he was carrying some kind of injury or something. Absolutely massive error. I don't get it. Play your best players at the start of the game. It's just as important as the end of the game. It really is, guys. It's bizarre logic, I think. Why would you have like if you look at where Munster kind of struggled at the start of the game, they kind of were struggling to break Glasgow down. They had lots of phases, lots of kind of, good kind of momentum at different periods. They just were missing that little bit of X factor. One of those offloads at the start of the game could have cut them open. He's so hard to stop when he's close to the line. He's such a huge man. I thought that was a huge error. And I think they really need to have a rethink about what they're doing there. And I would caution the logic of that. I think that was the one thing that really drove me mad about the South Africa World Cup, is that everyone like kind of lauding this stuff about the bomb squad. Like not picking Pollard was one of the biggest. Like they bailed themselves out of that after 25 minutes, but like that nearly cost them the World Cup. And remember the point Will's making about 50-50 shot. That makes sense to have someone who's kind of brings a bit more impetus off the bench. That makes perfect sense in South Africa when you've got Etzebeth coming off for off the pitch, having marmalised your pack for 45-50 minutes. Doesn't make sense for Wycherley. It just doesn't make any sense to do it that way. So glad you mentioned that. Big mistake. Play your best players at the start of the game. It's just I just don't see any logic in it. It drove me mad watching it, to be honest.
You've only got him for 160 more minutes, and before you joined your biggest rivals, and like he's talked about how much he owes you for sticking by him during his injuries. Why not use him for those 160 minutes? Like, it was only 80 in the end. They only got 35 out of 80 out of him. It's when you've got Lou Diaga and that's about fine, but
this is my point. If Jean Klein had
Gavin Coombs, I think you could equally make the point that Gavin Coombs has been underused in the last couple of months.
And he was very good off the bench, but I have less of an issue with that because I think Jack O'Donoghue has been in brilliant form.
Yes.
But I do agree with the overall point. But just on that, in terms of if you have Jean Klein and Tadhg Beirne there, I can more understand the logic, even though you'd probably be looking to get one of them in at 6 potentially and moving Peter O'Mahony or whatever. But But yeah, like it was a sad way for Snyman's, obviously, injury hit Munster career to end, and it was even sadder for likes of Simon Zebo and that. So it was just, like I said, Will, so flat, like as you'd expect at the full-time whistle. I think like there was an...
Ian, can I ask you something? Just because it was just you mentioned Simon Zebo, right? What do you think that, like, why hasn't he stayed for an extra season? What's happened there? Like that's the one thing that I would. Do you know when you're saying maybe there's a bit of disquiet in the camp, and you were kind of saying, "Well, I haven't any proof of that." Like, is Simon Zebo not staying on for another year? Is that not a little bit of like proof that there's something there's some people that aren't happy there?
Well, I was down in Limerick 3 weeks ago, and I sat down with Simon Zebo for about 25 minutes and had a really good chat with him. Now, I can only take him at face value, Luke. What he said and his body language and all that was a man who has just had enough. His body does not play ball. You see how early he comes off in games. He doesn't train pretty much during the week. So I think he wants to go out on his... Sorry, this is what he said. He wants to go out on his own terms. He's done everything that he wants pretty much in his career. He's happy with his lot. He doesn't want to stay on for an extra season where he's possibly coming off the bench against the Dragons in Rodney Parade or something like that. No offence to all our Dragons listeners.
It's always the example. Always the example.
Well, I could have said zebra or something, but that's a bit more glamorous, isn't it, going to Italy? But yeah, I don't think, Luke, he just wanted to go out. Obviously, he had the hope to go out by winning URC in Thomond Park. That was obviously the fairy tale ending. It didn't happen, but I don't know. I have to respect a guy who feels like he knows when the time is to walk away rather than going for one more season.
Yeah, I'm not sure there was a whole lot on the table for him either, though. Yeah. And Munster have a big focus on breaking even at the moment, and Carberry getting off the books was a big thing. It was why the O'Mahony thing was such a big deal for them, because suddenly they had him and Conor Murray's salaries landing in on top of them from Myrefew HQ at a time when they're trying to get back to a point where they're breaking even. And I know there's a big focus behind the scenes, so they've gone and got Takir Abrahams, but I think that's funded through Antoine Frisch. They got was it 300 grand they got from Toulon for Antoine Frisch?
Right.
So that's extra money that they had to play with suddenly, and they got him late in the day. And Leon were happy to release him from his contract.
Probably not on huge money either, you'd imagine.
Maybe on decent. I'd say he wouldn't be on bad money. I'd say he'd be on decent. If you look at the Biarritz released their salaries today, I don't know if anyone saw that. So you get a good gauge of what Pro D2 players are earning, up to about 100 grand. So if he's a top 14 winger, he's probably on, not bad cash. But like, I think
top 14 it wasn't starting though. That's the thing. Like Liam, that's why Liam.
He was signed from South Africa. I'd say the money wasn't. I wouldn't say he moved from South Africa for nothing. But I think Zebo. I don't dispute anything he said to you at the time, but I'd say part of the decision was, I don't know how much love he was getting from the at the negotiation table either, if they ever got to that point, because Munster have definitely tried to trim down what they're doing.
We're now going to finish up with the left wing moment of the week in association with Bank of Ireland. Luke, I know you kind of gave your one away earlier, but I'll let you reiterate it for the listeners who might not have been paying attention when you said it.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I kind of did give it away. Yeah, look, it was obviously the crucial moment in the game. Peterson taking that high ball, look, it was unbelievable technique. It was the game-changing moment. There was lots to criticise around Leinster. It gave the catcher no protection, guys, turning off and letting him have a free jump at. I'm pretty sure it was Jimmy O'Brien. And then no one in behind Jimmy O'Brien in case there was a spill behind as well. So lots for Leinster to pick through. They looked like that would lend itself to thinking they were pretty tired bodies. But to go back to the moment of the week, it was beautiful technique and a super finish. Now he nearly cost himself going wide, didn't he, for the big fancy dive. I'd say he was if Leinster got a try at the end and converted it, he would have been kicking himself. But magic moment, and it was kind of. I think it was a nice way for the Bulls to go and win the game with a kind of special moment like that, because they did dominate Leinster, I thought, in the air throughout the game.
Sorry, Luke, I do feel like I should jump to Jimmy O'Brien's defence. It was Frawley that he beat in the air. I think O'Brien...
It was Frawley, sorry, excuse me, sorry.
Well, Jimmy's getting a kicking.
Sorry, the red hair, I should have really known. Sorry, that's a bad mistake. But I just thought it was, in fairness, there was no protection for Frawley. I think there's a few guys there who should hold their hands up for that. It wasn't just all the catcher's fault. You need the guys in front of you. Munster do actually a brilliant job of it, but I thought Leinster went to sleep for a moment there and left him high and dry.
I'm not going for one specific moment, so I'm kind of cheating, but Cian, you summed up it well in your little Twitter thread earlier. Tadhg Beirne's performance against Glasgow was absolutely unbelievable. He's just such a good player. He's just such a good player to watch. It's not often you say like a second row is like appointment viewing, but every single match he has so many kind of standout moments, and you chronicled them. I urge anyone to go onto Keane's Twitter feed and see a collection of them earlier. The line-out steal was brilliant when he just was hung in the air for so long.
As I said in it, he was the classic did not deserve to be on the losing side performance.
Yeah.
He was absolutely.
He should have got man of the match. I'm sure it was.
How good is his passing? His passing's unreal.
Yeah.
Like that. I think he might be the difference for Ireland. Like his passings, like those little tip passes are the skill it takes. Like unreal.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see now who partners him in the second row. We can save that conversation. We have something to talk about in the coming weeks. Given that we don't have an All-Ireland final to talk about next week, we have to save some talking points for then. Cian, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I went for... It was slim pickings now, to be fair, in terms of picking a moment of the week from that weekend. But I went for Simon Zebo's farewell. There was a nice moment on the pitch afterwards. Like, he was so emotional saying farewell. Fair play to the Munster supporters who did stay back. I thought there'd be more, actually, who'd stay back. I think a lot of people forgot that it was Simon Zebo's last game, and I think it would have been nice if more people were there to bid farewell to an absolute icon of the province. I think we'll certainly miss watching him in terms of what he's brought over the last few years. I definitely miss chatting to him as well. He's always been one of the most open and honest guys to chat to, so I'm sure a media career beckons, so we haven't seen the last of him. But like I said, it was a disappointing and sad way for him to go out, but he is going out on his own terms anyway.
Rod, do you want to finish?
I didn't really have one. I've been thinking about it all day. I'm going to copy you and go for an individual performance in Cameron Hanekom. I thought
so good
for a player that I was vaguely aware of, but you know, following the Irish teams, and I hadn't seen an awful lot of him this season. My God, like he is scary. 22 years old. A succession of big moments. If you look at the URC page on their website of the kind of the statistical breakdown of the game, they've got like the all the top performers, and in Leinster it's like 7 or 8 different players. He leads the way on every metric for the Bulls. Every one of them. It was an incredible individual.
Reminds me of Pierre Spies a little bit. Like
Dwayne Vermeulen retires, and suddenly they've Evan Roos is starting this weekend, and Cameron Hanekom to come. They've got such depth, and like for a player in the year after a World Cup to emerge like that, I think Irish rugby's crying out for something like that, to someone to just step up in that way. And Leinster could have done with someone from their academy to, you know, stepping up into that first team. He was just amazing, and I know they have a couple of injuries going into Saturday's final, but I don't think any Glasgow lads are going to fancy tackling him.
That should be a good game. But I thank Rud, Cian and Luke for joining me on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. And although we don't have a Leinster and Munster final to look forward to next week, we will be back with another podcast as we start looking ahead to Ireland versus South Africa in a few weeks' time. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or listen on independent.ie. So until next time, thanks so much for listening, and goodbye.